So first, a little bit of scene setting. I think it's fair to say that the higher education sector is probably experiencing its biggest transformation in modern history. And that's down to a number of different things like governmental reforms, technologies like AI coming into the mainstream, the availability of online learning and more flexible forms of non-classroom based learning, and many, many, many more. I think, though, arguably the biggest change that we're seeing is actually within the students themselves, students and prospective students. And that's going to be the main focus of what I talk about in this webinar. So here's my take on why there's been such a big change amongst prospective students. So for years, probably even decades, students were actually relatively easy to understand and to cater for. Once upon a time, students that were smart enough or motivated enough chose a university that offered the course they were interested in doing. A university with a good reputation was ideal. Some decent facilities perhaps, and somewhere close enough to home that a monthly washing load dump on the parents wasn't completely out of the question. The idea being that 3 or 4 years of hard work and then into a debt-free career to live happily ever after. Because after all, students were going to university to get an education. I think the key difference we see today is actually that students go to university not just for an education, but actually for an experience. Students are giving greater importance to all the things that supplement their education. So that includes things like facilities, nightlife, contact hours, social events, and so on and so on. And I think in some cases, this is very much informed by a number of user research engagements we've done. I think students are actually viewing these things as more important than the education itself in many regards. So why has there been the shift from education to experience? Well, personally, I think that the biggest reason by far is the rise in tuition fees, the astronomical rise in tuition fees. Most UK students pay at least £9,000 a year to attend university in 2017, with no signs that that's going to stop. And to give some context, tuition fees were introduced in '98 at around about £1,000 a year. That rose to around about £3,000 a year in 2004, and from 2012 they've been set at around about the £9,000 a year mark. And of course, as with anything in life, if we pay more for it, we expect the product or service to be better. So that's, whether you're buying a new car or dining at a fancy restaurant, if there's a premium price, we expect a premium product or service. And I think higher education is proving itself to be no different in that regard. Students or customers, I should say, are naturally expecting more because they're paying more. And if the quality of the experience isn't rising, then students are going to be unhappy, obviously. This can lead to lower retention rates and difficulty actually in attracting students in the first place, as universities' reputation will inevitably suffer. Universities are likely to drop down the league tables, and the scores they receive from the recently introduced teaching excellence framework are also likely to struggle. I'll talk a little bit more about the teaching excellence framework later on in the webinar. In addition, many things also should be factored in, things like an increase in the diversity of students that are attending university today, increasing costs of delivering higher education, and reduction or the inevitable reductions in government funding. This all means that providing an exceptional customer experience is probably more difficult than it's ever been, but actually just as well more important than it's ever been also. It's this factor more so than any other, which has led to the notion that students have actually become customers. Through working with a large number of universities, I very much get the sense that this is now widely acknowledged amongst any kind of management staff that I've spoken to, and that universities feel they must treat their students as customers in order to effectively recruit them and continue to engage them throughout their time at the university. The idea that students have become customers is what's driving this notion of student experience, I think. To meet these rising expectations, universities must start providing better levels of customer services. Many people are actually talking about the possibility of universities in the future providing kind of full-time customer service options for students to attend to, and I think that's something that we may well see. The ones that do this are the ones that are going to be able to continue acquiring and recruiting students effectively. This ability to provide a great student experience will be put further under scrutiny, given that the latest Teaching Excellence Framework, or TEF test, that was introduced this year. Interestingly, actually, a number of the UK's top universities missed out on a gold award this year, which was unexpected. The TEF is an assessment panel that judges universities on teaching quality, learning environment, and student outcomes. And universities are either awarded gold, silver, or bronze based on their performance. It's essential that universities score well in this TEF test, because those that don't potentially won't be able to raise their fees any higher. So we know that providing a great student experience is critical to the ongoing success of university recruitment, but what can you do as an institution to actually tangibly improve yours? Well, here are 5 things that you can do that I put together that I think will help you upgrade your student experience and as a result directly boost and increase student recruitment along with it. So the first one is understanding your customers, and more specifically their needs. It kind of sounds like an obvious one, but it often gets overlooked as universities tend to make a lot of assumptions about the prospective students that they're trying to recruit. If you think about it, what do prospective students really want from your university? The answer to this question will, of course, vary dramatically between university to university, depending on your value proposition and the kinds of things that you offer. But this is where data can be really, really valuable. By reviewing the data you have on prospective students, you'll be able to make data-driven decisions that lead to higher conversions. For example, an analysis of the type of social post you run on Facebook that might reveal that some of the posts that you've posted related to alumni news articles sees users converting on the open day booking form at higher rates, for example, and therefore social posts should focus more on positive alumni stories going forward. Just an example there. Data can also help you identify the habits of your prospective customers. For example, data shows that messaging apps like WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger surpassed the likes of Facebook and Instagram in 2015. In terms of number of active users. This is particularly pronounced amongst 16 and 17-year-olds. So clearly, there's a key shift in how this age group actually want to communicate with organisations and institutions. In addition, students can now do things like get a date, order a pizza, book a cab, watch the latest blockbuster, just with a couple of swipes or taps. Universities must create experiences that kind of mirror the way that these potential customers are behaving in their daily lives. They've got to kind of engage with students on their terms. Anything else other than that is actually quite jarring to the experience and increases the likelihood that students will drop out of the recruitment funnel. Imagine what might happen to student acquisition, for example, if universities allowed prospective students to WhatsApp them or text them with queries and requests, really engaging with them on their terms. So why should you care that your students use apps like Uber and Tinder regularly? What does that actually have to do with getting them to sign up to a university course? Well, as I mentioned, universities need to try and provide experiences that really mirror the way students behave in their day-to-day lives. A great example of this is the matchmaker that we built a little while ago for the University of Salford. So think kind of Tinder meets higher education in this instance. The idea was that students would enter a few details about themselves, and the matchmaker would serve up course recommendations based on those preferences. Students could then find out some more intimate details about each course before swiping left or swiping right, depending on whether they liked the idea of doing that course or if they didn't like the idea of doing that course. The idea being that they could find their perfect match through this really nice interface that very much mirrors the way that technology and user interfaces are going or were going at the time. Another nice example is Georgia State University, showing a really good understanding of their customer needs. So they created a text chatbot recently called Pounce, which I think was named after their mascot. And the idea was that it could answer student queries sent to it by a text message. So initially, to kind of build the intelligence of the chatbots, it was fed with hundreds of FAQs to allow it to learn how to answer certain queries. With a bit of machine learning built in, Pounce was actually able to then get better and better over time at answering questions potential students had. The beauty of this particular application was, of course, the automation of it. Students could message the chatbot at any time, at any place, something that just really wouldn't be cost effective if it had to be manned by human beings. And for Georgia State, this actually led to almost a 4% increase in student recruitment. It's important to note, however, that before Georgia State built this chatbot, they actually needed quite a robust set of data on which to build their bot. In this case, that was a list of hundreds of FAQs that gave the bot a really good grounding and was able to learn over time and how to answer those questions better. And it's that point that often gets overlooked, I think, when it comes to exploring artificial intelligence and automation, something which is a key buzzword in the higher education sector at the moment. So that leads me nicely onto my next point, which is the need to have well-built, robust, well-organized data sets that actually allow you to implement automation and AI going forward. So as I said, AI and automation have become pretty prominent buzzwords in the higher education sector in the last year or so, probably even longer than that. I think to a lot of people, artificial intelligence kind of conjures up images of androids taking over the world, but we can probably relegate that type of thing to science fiction for at least a little while. AI can range from simple predefined decision trees of communication with predefined responses. For example, a chatbot might ask a potential student, would you like to discover courses at the university? And then maybe offer up the option of yes or no. It would then provide further options that obviously allow you to retain control of the conversation because no natural language processing is required. On the flip side, conversations can become more intelligent by allowing the user to type anything to the bot. This, of course, requires a considerably greater level of intelligence as there are almost infinite number of variables. My colleague, Josh Schomer, actually recently ran a webinar on this very subject, which goes into much more detail about artificial intelligence and automation. Please do check it out if you're interested in learning more. It's available on the school's website. As I said, universities like Georgia State have started exploring ways in which they can apply artificial intelligence to improve recruitment. And it'll undoubtedly, I think, come further into the mainstream in the coming months and years with increasingly creative applications of this technology. And as universities get better at building more robust and more well-organized data sets. Another example is here at Squiz, we actually have recently been developing something called a discovery engine, which you can see kind of in action as I speak. It's very much a prototype at the moment. The idea is that the discovery engine can learn from student behaviours and recommend courses that it thinks a student will like based on a number of factors. So similar in many ways to the matchmaker. The idea is a student lands on the discovery engine and inputs a little bit of data about themselves, things like UCAS points they're expected to get, or maybe courses or careers that they're interested in. And the idea is that the discovery engine will then serve up courses that it thinks the student will like. The student can then interact with those courses in different ways, hopefully with the idea that they will find out more information or actually look to book an open day or even enroll in the course directly. In addition, the discovery engine can learn more about a potential student's preferences based on the type of content that they've been engaging with elsewhere on their site. So it doesn't actually require necessarily the inputs of preferences straight away. The idea is that it can actually learn and know a little bit about the user before they've even engaged with the application. The trouble is, to a lot of universities, I think automation and AI often sounds like a bit of a silver bullet. The reality is, as I mentioned, that many universities lack these data sets or they're not of sufficient quality to make any significant use of them. A good example of this actually is that some universities are able now to predict with remarkable levels of accuracy when a student's on the verge of dropping out of the university. But this requires the setup of data feeds that supply information relevant to the likelihood of a student dropping out. Things like how many lectures they're going to, the quality of grades they're getting, their ethnicity and background even. And the ability to gather and analyze these types of data sets needs to be in place before these AI systems can be effectively applied. But you can kind of get a flavor of the types of creative things you can do if those data sets are in place. It's also worth noting that universities need to be pretty diligent when it comes to collecting and storing this type of student data. As I'm sure you'll all be aware, the recently introduced General Data Protection Regulation means that there are actually a bunch of new rules and regulations on what can and cannot be stored. Understanding this and educating stakeholders will be key to building those great data sets that can be used for AI and automation going forward. Third is the concept of providing students with a tangible ROI, a return on investment. A concept that's connected to the idea of students becoming customers and expectations increasing. Our user research through many of the projects that we've done has showed that often while students are placing a large value on the student experience, many actually are also demanding to understand what their life is going to look like kind of 3 or 4 years down the line. In short, students want to know the return that they're going to get on their substantial financial investment. Of course, if you're paying £9,000 a year, you want to know what you're actually going to get back for that money. Universities that can effectively show students this and show them this future version of themselves, in addition to demonstrating why the student experience is so good, are the ones that are going to be able to continually recruit and acquire students effectively. We recently did a bit of work with Bucks New University on a new site build, and the idea of showing students a future version of themselves was a key driving force behind Creative. This led to a number of ideas, one of which was actually to give prospective students the option to search not just for courses, as most typical university sites do, but actually for careers, because whilst many students aren't actually sure what they want to study, research showed us, or user research showed us, that they're actually far more confident in outlining the type of job or career that they'd eventually like to enter into. So career search was ideal and has actually proved very successful. Additionally, we actually talked about a job mapper, for example, as well. That was the idea where we would pin maps, we would pin stories of alumni that had attended Bucks New University onto a map, so that prospective students could explore and see stories from those that had been there and done it. And yeah, it was the idea that these prospective students could really put themselves in the shoes of somebody that had been there and done it all before them. My fourth point is the idea of quality over quantity. It might sound kind of odd during a webinar about boosting student acquisition that I would suggest that quantity of students is actually less important than quality, but hear me out. With the removal of student number caps back in 2015, universities are actually more or less free to recruit as many students as they like. And naturally, more students means more revenue. And let's be honest, revenue is one of the, if not the most important thing to many universities. But consider it like this. To recruit students effectively, your student experience needs to be top of the range, as we've discussed. You can have as many spots to fill as you like, but if you're lacking in student experience, you're just not gonna fill them. And if universities do over-recruit, which is, of course, very tempting, it becomes increasingly difficult to offer a premium student experience to everybody. So you get this kind of vicious cycle that develops. The solution to which, I think, is to focus on your student experience and let the recruitment not take care of itself as such, but know that recruitment and acquisition efforts will be infinitely easier if your student experience is exceptional. That, to me, is the most important focal point. The TEF will also be heavily impacted by an imbalance between volumes of students and quality of student experience. So the fifth and final point that I wanted to make is around forging an identity and sticking to it. So we've met with dozens of universities who face a bit of an identity crisis, to put it simply, especially in the face of the student caps being lifted a couple of years ago. With universities now able to take on more and more students, of course face more choice in where they'll be accepted. So naturally, this increases the competition between universities. At one end of the spectrum, you have your elite red brick universities, your Oxfords and your Cambridges, that will likely never have any recruitment issues whatsoever. They can rely purely on reputation. At the other end, you have smaller universities that are carving out niches in terms of course offerings or offering a particularly exceptional student experience, whatever that might look like. The greatest risk we've found is to universities who are kind of in that middle ground between the two, not quite one or the other, maybe attempting to be everything to everyone. This is where recruitment, I think, will face the biggest squeeze because the university cannot provide a compelling student experience differentiator. Bucks New, I talked about a little bit earlier, I think a really great example of a university that's really carved out a niche in a crowded market. It knows it can't compete with the likes of Oxford and Cambridge in terms of sort of reputation. But what it has done is it's doubled down on the things it's really good at and that it really does well. Things like nursing and aviation courses, and highlighting the fact through storytelling on the website that it's a small, friendly, highly personalised institution, which is incredibly appealing to many students. Harper Adams is another example of a university that's forged a niche in a crowded market, focusing purely on the agricultural and rural sector and using their website to tell a really nice, compelling story as to why they're leaders in that specific field. And that concludes this webinar. To summarise my key points, so that was understanding your customers, particularly their needs, and using data to help you do that. Second was building robust and organised data sets that will provide the springboard for implementing AI and automation. You can't really jump into AI and automation before you have that data organised. Third was show students what their ROI will be like. So as fees continue to rise, students are going to want to really understand where that money is going and what they're getting for that money. Don't sacrifice quality for quantity. And finally, as I just mentioned, forging an identity and sticking to it. Hopefully, armed with these 5 tips, you can begin to find ways to really look to improve your student experience, and hopefully, as a result, boost student acquisition and recruitment efforts. Excuse me. Just time for a quick shameless plug before I take any questions. Myself and 2 colleagues, Steph Bradley, who's an analyst here at Squiz, Josh Shomer, who's a technical lead, we're actually performing a masterclass in a couple of weeks' time at the University of Kent in Canterbury. We're on Wednesday the 12th between 2:50 and 5:30 in the afternoon. We're talking about AI and data and how that relates to the student experience, so touching on a lot of stuff I've covered today, but going into it in considerably more detail. There are still some spaces left available, and we'd love to see you there if you can make it at all. So yeah, thank you very much for listening to me today, and yeah, I'll now take any questions. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and have a nice rest of the day.